4 years, people had mysteriously vanished in the Bennington Triangle. In 2005, college student Lisa Hartwell became the latest name added to this cursed region. In the rural beauty of Vermont, among covered bridges and green mountains, a 19-year secret lay buried. Modern DNA technology would finally prove that the real monster wasn't paranormal forces, but someone entirely human in appearance. Before diving into this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated with the latest cold case investigations. October 28, 2005. The autumn foliage in Vermont's Green Mountains was at its spectacular peak, painting the hillsides in brilliant reds, oranges, and golds that drew visitors from around the world. The small college town of Bennington was bustling with leaf peepers and Halloween weekend festivities, creating a festive atmosphere that masked the darker history lurking beneath the surface of this picturesque New England community. Lisa Hartwell, 19, a sophomore at Bennington College, walked across the historic campus as the late afternoon sun filtered through the blazing maple trees. She was everything that Vermont's progressive values celebrated, an intelligent, socially conscious young woman studying environmental science with dreams of protecting the natural beauty that surrounded her. Lisa embodied the inclusive spirit that had led Vermont's communities to adopt declarations of inclusion, welcoming all people regardless of background or identity. The Bennington College campus, nestled in the foothills of the Green Mountains, was known for its progressive educational philosophy and tight-knit community atmosphere. Students and faculty prided themselves on creating an environment where creativity flourished and social justice was more than just an academic concept, it was a way of life. Lisa had grown up in Burlington, Vermont's largest city, but had fallen in love with the intimate scale and natural beauty of Bennington. Her parents, David and Margaret Hartwell, were both educators who had instilled in their daughter a deep appreciation for learning and a commitment to making the world a better place. They had been supportive of her decision to attend Bennington, knowing that the college's unique approach to education would nurture her intellectual curiosity and social conscience. Lisa was born to change the world, her mother Margaret would later tell investigators. She saw injustice and inequality everywhere and was determined to do something about it. Vermont felt like the perfect place for her to develop those ideals in a community that shared her values. As a sophomore, Lisa was beginning to focus her studies on environmental policy, with a particular interest in sustainable agriculture and renewable energy. She spent her free time volunteering with local environmental groups and had recently joined a student organization working to make the college campus carbon neutral by 2010. Lisa's commitment to social causes extended beyond environmental issues. She tutored local high school students who were struggling academically, participated in food drives for the local homeless shelter, and had spent the previous summer working with migrant farm workers to document labor violations. Her professors consistently praised her combination of intellectual rigor and practical compassion. On this particular Friday afternoon, Lisa was heading to her off-campus apartment after finishing her last class of the week, a seminar on environmental ethics that had sparked a particularly engaging discussion about corporate responsibility and climate change. She was looking forward to a quiet evening of reading and preparation for a presentation she was scheduled to give the following week on Vermont's renewable energy initiatives. The walk from campus to her apartment normally took about 15 minutes, following a route that wound through some of Bennington's most charming residential neighborhoods. The streets were lined with historic homes dating back to the 18th and 19th centuries, many of them decorated for Halloween with carved pumpkins and autumn wreaths that added to the small-town New England atmosphere. Lisa lived in a small apartment above a local bookstore on Main Street, an arrangement that perfectly suited her as both an avid reader and a supporter of local businesses. The apartment was modest but comfortable, with large windows that provided views of the surrounding mountains and filled the space with natural light during the day. As she walked through downtown Bennington, Lisa stopped to chat with Sarah Chen, a local barista at the coffee shop where she was a regular customer. Sarah would later remember their conversation as typical of Lisa's friendly and engaged personality. She asked about Sarah's upcoming midterm exams at the local community college and offered to help her study for her environmental science class. Lisa was just one of those people who made everyone feel important, Sarah recalled years later. She remembered details about your life and always seemed genuinely interested in how you were doing. She made our little town feel even more like a real community. After leaving the coffee shop, Lisa continued toward her apartment, but she never arrived. When her roommate Emma Patterson returned from a weekend trip to visit family on Sunday evening, she found that Lisa's bed hadn't been slept in and her books were still spread out on her desk exactly as she had left them on Friday afternoon. Emma initially wasn't overly concerned. College students sometimes made spontaneous decisions to visit friends or attend parties without informing their roommates. But when Lisa failed to appear for her Monday morning classes and didn't respond to phone calls or text messages, Emma knew something was seriously wrong. Lisa was known for her reliability and academic dedication. She had never missed a class without advance notice and always kept her commitments to professors and fellow students. Her absence from a presentation she had been preparing for weeks was completely out of character and immediately raised red flags among those who knew her well. Emma contacted the Bennington Police Department on Monday afternoon, October 31, 2005, to report her roommate missing. The timing, Halloween Day in a town already on edge due to the historical mysteries of the Bennington Triangle, added an ominous quality to what might otherwise have been treated as a routine missing person report. The Bennington Police Department, like many small-town law enforcement agencies in Vermont, operated with limited resources but compensated with intimate knowledge of the local community and close relationships with residents. Chief Robert Martinez had been serving the community for over 20 years and knew most residents by name. When Officer Jennifer Walsh took Emma's missing person report, she was struck by the inconsistency between Lisa's responsible character and her sudden disappearance. Walsh had encountered Lisa several times during community events and remembered her as a thoughtful, engaged young woman who seemed deeply rooted in the local community despite being a relative newcomer to Bennington. Lisa wasn't the type of person to just take off without telling anyone, Officer Walsh noted in her initial report. She had too many responsibilities and commitments to simply vanish without explanation. From the beginning, we treated this as a potentially serious situation. The initial investigation focused on retracing Lisa's movements from the time she left campus on Friday afternoon until she was expected to arrive at her apartment. Security cameras from local businesses provided some clues about her route, but the coverage was spotty and the image quality was limited by 2005 technology standards. The last confirmed sighting of Lisa was captured on the security camera of Miller's hardware store on Main Street, showing her walking north toward her apartment at approximately 4:45 p.m. on Friday afternoon. She appeared relaxed and unhurried, carrying her backpack and what appeared to be a small bag from the local bookstore where she lived. Lisa's cell phone records showed that she had received and answered a call at 4:52 p.m., just 7 minutes after the hardware store camera captured her image. The call had lasted less than 2 minutes and came from a number that investigators were initially unable to trace. This call would later prove to be crucial evidence in solving the case, but in 2005, the technology and resources needed to fully analyze cell phone communications were limited. As the investigation expanded beyond the immediate search for Lisa, law enforcement officials couldn't ignore the historical context that made her disappearance particularly unsettling. The Bennington area had gained notoriety for a series of mysterious disappearances that had occurred between 1945 and 1950, earning the region the nickname Bennington Triangle, a reference to the more famous Bermuda Triangle. The most famous of these earlier disappearances was that of Paula Weldon, an 18-year-old Bennington College student who had vanished while hiking on the Long Trail in December 1946. Despite extensive searches involving hundreds of volunteers and professional search teams, Paula was never found, and her disappearance became one of Vermont's most enduring unsolved mysteries. Other disappearances in the area included Mid-Dye Rivers, an experienced outdoorsman who vanished while hunting in 1945, and several other individuals who had simply disappeared without a trace in the rugged terrain surrounding Glastonbury Mountain. The cluster of unsolved cases had spawned numerous theories ranging from natural explanations like bear attacks and harsh weather to more speculative ideas involving paranormal activity or undiscovered predators. While law enforcement officials were careful not to jump to conclusions about potential connections between Lisa's disappearance and the historical cases, the similarities were impossible to ignore. Like Paula Weldon, Lisa was a Bennington College student who had vanished without a trace in an area known for its mysterious disappearances. The search for Lisa Hartwell began immediately and involved multiple agencies working together in the collaborative spirit that characterized Vermont's approach to law enforcement. The Vermont State Police provided specialized resources and expertise, while local volunteer fire departments and search and rescue teams contributed manpower and knowledge of the local terrain. The search strategy had to account for the challenging geography of the Bennington area. The region was characterized by dense forests, steep mountain slopes, and numerous waterways that could easily conceal evidence or make recovery efforts extremely difficult. The approaching winter weather added urgency to the effort, as Vermont's harsh winters could make searching impossible for months. Search teams focused initially on the route between Bennington College and Lisa's apartment, expanding outward to cover hiking trails, abandoned buildings, and remote areas where someone might dispose of evidence or where an accident might have occurred. The famous Long Trail, where Paula Weldon had disappeared decades earlier, received particular attention from searchers. The community response to Lisa's disappearance exemplified Vermont's strong tradition of neighbor helping neighbor. Hundreds of volunteers joined the search effort, including college students, faculty members, local business owners, and residents from throughout the region. The Search Command Post, established at the Bennington Fire Department, became a hub of activity as volunteers organized into teams and coordinated their efforts with professional search personnel. Among the most dedicated volunteers was Dr. Michael Brennan, a 45-year-old professor of psychology at a nearby college who had moved to Vermont from Boston 5 years earlier. Brennan had quickly become an active member of the community, volunteering with various local organizations and establishing himself as someone residents could count on during times of crisis. Dr. Brennan's academic background made him particularly valuable to the search effort. His understanding of human behavior and decision-making processes helped search coordinators develop strategies for covering areas where Lisa might have gone voluntarily or where someone might have taken her against her will. He also provided emotional support to Lisa's family and friends, helping them cope with the stress and uncertainty of the situation. Dr. Brennan, you have shown yourself to be a predator who not only committed murder but who took pleasure in deceiving and psychologically torturing the victim's family for nearly 2 decades, Judge Carter said during sentencing. Your actions represent a level of calculated cruelty that goes far beyond the original crime. You will spend the rest of your life in prison, which is the only appropriate response to crimes of this magnitude. The resolution of Lisa Hartwell's case had profound implications for Vermont's approach to cold case investigations and community safety. The case became a landmark example of how genetic genealogy could solve crimes that had seemed impossible to resolve using traditional investigative methods. Dr. Sarah Kim's work on the case led to expanded funding for the Vermont Forensic Laboratory's Cold Case Unit and the adoption of new protocols for preserving and analyzing evidence from unsolved crimes. The success in solving Lisa's case prompted reviews of dozens of other cold cases throughout the state, several of which were subsequently solved using similar techniques. The case also prompted difficult conversations within Vermont's progressive communities about the balance between trust and vigilance. The state's tradition of restorative justice and community-based problem-solving had created an environment where someone like Brennan could exploit the very openness and trust that made Vermont communities special. Lisa's case taught us that evil can hide behind the most progressive and caring facade, said Detective Lieutenant Thompson during a law enforcement conference. We can't let our commitment to rehabilitation and community healing blind us to the reality that some individuals are capable of extraordinary deception and cruelty. The Bennington College community underwent significant changes in the wake of Brennan's conviction. New policies were implemented regarding faculty interactions with students, background check procedures were strengthened, and support systems were enhanced for students who reported concerning behavior from staff or faculty members. The college also established the Lisa Hartwell Center for Environmental Justice, which combined academic research with community activism in the areas that had been most important to Lisa during her life. The center became a focal point for student engagement with environmental and social justice issues, ensuring that Lisa's ideals would continue to influence future generations of students. For the broader Bennington community, the resolution of Lisa's case brought both closure and sobering recognition of how long they had been deceived by someone they trusted. The annual memorial events that had been organized by Brennan were restructured and moved to different venues, as the community sought to honor Lisa's memory without the taint of her killer's involvement. The Hartwell family found a measure of peace in finally knowing the truth about their daughter's fate, though the pain of Brennan's betrayal added a new dimension to their grief. Margaret and David Hartwell became advocates for families of missing persons and supporters of expanded funding for cold case investigations. "We can't bring Lisa back, and we can't undo the 19 years of lies and manipulation we endured," David Hartwell said in a recent interview. "But we can work to ensure that other families don't have to wait as long for answers, and that predators like Michael Brennan can't hide behind facades of respectability and community service." The case also had implications for understanding the historical disappearances that had given the Bennington area its reputation as a place where people mysteriously vanished. While Lisa's case was definitively solved, it raised questions about whether some of the earlier disappearances attributed to natural causes or unexplained phenomena might actually have been the work of human predators who had never been identified. The Vermont State Police announced plans to re-examine several historical missing person cases using modern forensic techniques, acknowledging that past investigations might have missed evidence that could now be analyzed using genetic genealogy and other advanced methods. Dr. Michael Brennan remained in the Vermont State Prison, serving his life sentence without possibility of parole. Prison officials reported that he had largely isolated himself from other inmates and staff, spending most of his time reading academic journals and writing what he described as scholarly papers on criminal psychology. The irony of a convicted murderer writing about criminal behavior from prison was not lost on those who had followed his case. His former colleagues noted that even in prison, Brennan seemed to view himself as an observer and analyst of criminal behavior rather than acknowledging his own role as a perpetrator of horrific crimes. The covered bridges and green mountains of Vermont continue to attract visitors from around the world, drawn by the state's reputation for natural beauty and progressive values. But Lisa Hartwell's story had added a new chapter to Vermont's complex narrative, a reminder that even in the most trusting and inclusive communities, vigilance remained necessary. The Bennington Triangle, once known primarily for historical mysteries and unexplained disappearances, was now associated with a very human form of evil that had hidden in plain sight for nearly 2 decades. The case proved that the real monsters weren't supernatural forces or undiscovered creatures, but individuals who exploited trust and community bonds to conceal their crimes. Today, visitors to Bennington can walk the same streets where Lisa Hartwell spent her final afternoon, passing the bookstore where she lived, the coffee shop where she was a regular customer, and the college campus where she pursued her dreams of making the world a better place. A small memorial garden has been established near her former apartment, featuring native Vermont plants and a plaque that reads, "In memory of Lisa Hartwell, environmental advocate, social justice champion, beloved daughter and friend." The Long Trail, where Paula Weldon had disappeared decades earlier, continues to attract hikers from around the world. But Lisa's case had shown that not all disappearances in Vermont's wilderness areas were the result of natural hazards or unexplained phenomena. Sometimes the greatest danger came not from the mountains or forests, but from those who walked among the community wearing masks of respectability and concern. In the end, Lisa Hartwell's legacy lived on not just in the scholarship that bore her name or the environmental center established in her honor, but in the lesson her case taught about the importance of remaining vigilant even in the most trusting communities. Her story became part of Vermont's enduring narrative, a state that valued progressive ideals and community bonds, but had learned that these very qualities could be exploited by those with the darkest intentions. The genetic genealogy techniques that solved Lisa's case went on to help resolve numerous other cold cases across Vermont and throughout New England. Each success brought closure to families who had waited years for answers and demonstrated the power of scientific advancement to deliver justice across the span of decades. Vermont's commitment to restorative justice and community healing remained strong, but Lisa's case had taught important lessons about balancing trust with awareness and hope with vigilance. The Green Mountain State continued to welcome newcomers and celebrate its inclusive values, but with a deeper understanding of the need to protect the vulnerable members of its communities. As autumn returned to Vermont each year, painting the mountains in brilliant colors that drew visitors from around the world, Lisa's story served as a reminder that beauty and evil could coexist, and that the most important battles for justice were often fought not in courtrooms or legislative chambers, but in the daily work of building communities where trust could flourish while still maintaining the awareness necessary to protect those who needed protection most. The mystery of the Bennington Triangle had gained one more chapter, not a tale of supernatural disappearances or unexplained phenomena, but a very human story of predation, deception, and ultimately, justice. Lisa Hartwell's case proved that while some monsters might hide behind friendly faces and progressive ideals, the combined power of advancing science, persistent investigation, and community determination could eventually expose even the most carefully constructed deceptions. In Vermont's ongoing story of balancing idealism with reality, progress with vigilance, and trust with safety, Lisa Hartwell's case stood as both a tragedy and a triumph, a young life lost too soon, but a mystery finally solved, and a community forever changed by the knowledge that justice, though delayed, could still find its way through even the greenest mountains and the most trusting communities. The ripple effects of the case continued to be felt throughout Vermont's academic and legal communities long after Brennan's conviction. Universities across the state implemented new protocols for faculty-student interactions, background screening procedures, and reporting mechanisms for concerning behavior. The Vermont State Colleges system established a task force to review policies and create standardized approaches to preventing predatory behavior within academic institutions. The legal community also grappled with the implications of the case for Vermont's progressive approach to criminal justice. While the state remained committed to restorative justice principles, Lisa's case highlighted the need for more robust screening and monitoring systems to identify individuals who might exploit the state's emphasis on rehabilitation and community healing. Detective Lieutenant Thompson, who had led the reopened investigation, became a national spokesperson for the use of genetic genealogy in cold case investigations. He regularly spoke at law enforcement conferences about the importance of preserving evidence and maintaining hope that even the oldest cases could eventually be solved. Lisa Hartwell's case taught us that no evidence is too old and no case is too cold if we have the determination and the tools to pursue justice, Thompson often said in his presentations. But it also taught us that the most dangerous predators are often those who hide behind facades of respectability and community service. The case prompted Vermont to join a growing network of states committed to using genetic genealogy for cold case investigations. Funding was allocated for training programs, equipment upgrades, and expanded collaboration with genealogical researchers who specialized in law enforcement applications. Dr. Sarah Kim, whose forensic genetic work had been crucial to solving the case, was promoted to head Vermont's new cold case genetic genealogy unit. Her team began systematically reviewing dozens of unsolved cases, looking for biological evidence that could be reanalyzed using advanced techniques. Every family deserves answers, Dr. Kim explained during the unit's inaugural press conference. Lisa Hartwell's family waited 19 years for the truth about what happened to their daughter. Our goal is to use the tools we have now to ensure that other families don't have to wait that long. The Bennington College community established new traditions to honor Lisa's memory while healing from the trauma of learning that her killer had been among them for so many years. The annual Environmental Science Symposium was renamed the Lisa Hartwell Symposium for Environmental Justice, bringing together students, faculty, and activists to discuss the intersection of environmental protection and social equity that had been so important to Lisa. The college also created a new position, the Lisa Hartwell Ombudsperson for Student Safety, to provide confidential support for students who experienced concerning behavior from faculty or staff members. The position was designed to ensure that future students would have multiple avenues for reporting problems and seeking help. Margaret and David Hartwell, now in their 70s, found purpose in their grief by becoming advocates for other families dealing with missing loved ones. They worked with legislators to strengthen funding for cold case investigations and pushed for laws requiring better preservation of evidence in unsolved cases. We can't bring Lisa back, but we can work to make sure that other families get answers sooner than we did, Margaret Hartwell said during testimony before the Vermont legislature. Every family dealing with a missing loved one deserves to know that law enforcement has the tools and resources they need to pursue justice, no matter how much time has passed. The couple also worked with the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, NAMUS, to improve data sharing and coordination between law enforcement agencies. Lisa's case had shown how genetic genealogy could solve cases that had seemed hopeless, but it had also highlighted the importance of proper evidence preservation and systematic approaches to cold case review. The Bennington Triangle, once known primarily for historical mysteries and folklore, took on new meaning in the wake of Lisa's case. Local historians and researchers began re-examining some of the earlier disappearances with fresh perspectives, wondering whether cases attributed to natural causes or unexplained phenomena might actually have involved human predators who were never identified. The Vermont State Police announced plans to apply genetic genealogy techniques to several historical missing person cases, including some from the 1940s and 1950s that had contributed to the Bennington Triangle legend. While many of these cases lacked the biological evidence needed for DNA analysis, investigators hoped that new approaches to evidence recovery might yield unexpected discoveries. Tourism officials in the Bennington area faced the challenge of addressing the region's dark history while still promoting its natural beauty and recreational opportunities. The solution was to embrace a more complete narrative that acknowledged both the mysteries of the past and the resolution that modern science had brought to Lisa's case. The Long Trail, where Paula Weldon had disappeared in 1946, was updated with new safety information and emergency communication devices that reflected advances in technology and outdoor safety practices. While hikers continued to enjoy the trail's natural beauty, they did so with greater awareness of both natural hazards and human dangers. Emily's Covered Bridge, the historic structure associated with local folklore about a young woman's tragic death, became a symbol of how old stories and new realities could coexist. The bridge remained a popular tourist destination, but new interpretive materials provided historical context while also promoting awareness of domestic violence and mental health resources. The bridge served as a reminder that Vermont's commitment to addressing social problems extended beyond criminal justice to encompass mental health, domestic violence prevention, and community support systems that could prevent tragedies before they occurred. Dr. Michael Brennan's conviction also prompted soul-searching within Vermont's academic community about the culture of collegiality and trust that had allowed him to operate without suspicion for so many years. Professional organizations developed new guidelines for recognizing and reporting concerning behavior, while universities implemented more robust systems for tracking and investigating complaints against faculty members. The case highlighted the need for better communication between institutions when faculty members moved between positions, ensuring that concerning behavior patterns couldn't be hidden by job changes or institutional boundaries. Vermont's colleges and universities developed a confidential information sharing system that allowed appropriate screening while protecting privacy rights. Mental health professionals also studied Brennan's case to better understand the psychology of predators who successfully maintain public facades while committing horrific crimes. His ability to fool colleagues, students, and community members for nearly 2 decades provided insights into the sophisticated deception strategies used by certain types of criminals. Brennan's case shows us that some individuals are capable of extraordinary compartmentalization and deception, explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a forensic psychologist who studied the case. He was able to maintain genuine-seeming relationships and perform his professional duties effectively while harboring the secret of a terrible crime. Understanding how this is possible helps us develop better screening and detection methods. The psychological profile that emerged from studying Brennan's case was incorporated into training programs for law enforcement officers, mental health professionals, and educators who work with vulnerable populations. The goal was to help identify warning signs and suspicious behavior patterns that might indicate hidden criminal activity. Vermont's victim services organizations also expanded their programs in response to Lisa's case and the particular trauma experienced by her family and community. The revelation that a trusted community member had been responsible for her death while pretending to help find her created a unique form of betrayal that required specialized support approaches. New support groups were established for families dealing with cold case investigations, providing both practical resources and emotional support during the often lengthy process of seeking answers. The groups also connected families with similar experiences, creating networks of mutual support and advocacy. The Vermont Victim Assistance Program developed specialized protocols for cases involving long-term deception by perpetrators, recognizing that the psychological impact of such betrayals required different approaches than typical victim services. The program trained counselors to address the complex emotions that arose when trusted community members were revealed to be criminals. As the first anniversary of Brennan's conviction approached, the Bennington community organized a day of remembrance that honored Lisa's memory while also celebrating the resolution of her case. The event included environmental restoration projects, educational presentations about genetic genealogy, and fundraising for cold case investigations. The day concluded with a ceremony at the memorial garden that had been established near Lisa's former apartment. Hundreds of community members gathered to hear speakers reflect on Lisa's life, the impact of her case, and the lessons learned about trust, vigilance, and justice. Lisa Hartwell believed in the power of science and education to make the world better, said Dr. Patricia Williams, Lisa's former professor, during the ceremony. It's fitting that science ultimately brought justice in her case, and that her story continues to educate people about both the possibilities and the limitations of trust in our communities. The ceremony also featured the dedication of new safety measures throughout Bennington, including improved lighting along pedestrian routes, emergency call boxes, and enhanced communication systems that reflected lessons learned from Lisa's case and other safety incidents. The Vermont legislature passed the Lisa Hartwell Cold Case Evidence Preservation Act, requiring law enforcement agencies to maintain biological evidence from unsolved cases for extended periods and to systematically review cold cases using emerging forensic techniques. The law also established funding mechanisms for genetic genealogy investigations and training programs for law enforcement personnel. The legislation was seen as a model for other states dealing with similar challenges in cold case investigations. Vermont's experience with Lisa's case provided valuable insights into the resources, expertise, and institutional commitment needed to successfully apply genetic genealogy to decades-old crimes. International law enforcement agencies also took notice of Vermont's success with genetic genealogy, leading to collaborative efforts and information sharing that expanded the reach of these investigative techniques. Lisa's case became part of a global movement to use advancing science to solve cold cases and deliver justice to families who had waited years for answers. The case was featured in academic journals, law enforcement publications, and true crime documentaries that explored both the investigative techniques that led to its resolution and the psychological and social factors that had allowed Brennan to avoid detection for so long. Each telling of Lisa's story reinforced the key lessons that had emerged from her case: the importance of preserving evidence, the power of advancing forensic science, the need for vigilance even in trusting communities, and the possibility that justice could be achieved even decades after a crime was committed. Today, visitors to Vermont can experience the state's natural beauty and progressive values while also understanding the complex realities that shape any human community. Lisa Hartwell's story has become part of Vermont's narrative, not as a source of fear or suspicion, but as a reminder of the ongoing work required to balance trust with safety, idealism with realism, and hope with vigilance. The covered bridges still span Vermont's rivers and streams, the Green Mountains still rise majestically against the sky, and communities still come together to support one another in times of need. But Lisa's case has added depth and nuance to these enduring symbols, showing that Vermont's greatest strength lies not in the absence of darkness, but in the community's commitment to confronting darkness with truth, science, and justice. In the end, the real victory in Lisa Hartwell's case was not just the conviction of her killer, but the demonstration that even the most carefully constructed deceptions could be exposed, that even the oldest mysteries could be solved, and that even the most painful betrayals could ultimately lead to stronger, more vigilant, and more just communities. The Bennington Triangle would always be associated with mysterious disappearances and unexplained phenomena, but Lisa's case had added a new chapter to that story, one that showed how human determination, scientific advancement, and community commitment could triumph over even the most sophisticated criminal deception. Her legacy lived on not in fear or suspicion, but in the knowledge that truth, though sometimes long delayed, would eventually find its way to light. Brennan was incredible during those first few days, remembered Emma Patterson, Lisa's roommate. He seemed to really understand what we were going through, and he had this calm, reassuring presence that helped all of us stay focused on finding Lisa instead of falling apart. Brennan organized volunteer search teams with military-like precision, ensuring that every area was systematically covered and that no potential evidence was overlooked. His knowledge of the local terrain, gained through years of hiking and outdoor recreation, made him an invaluable resource for planning search routes and identifying areas that might not be obvious to outsiders. What nobody in the Bennington community knew was that Dr. Michael Brennan was harboring a terrible secret. His helpful demeanor and expertise in coordinating the search efforts masked a dark truth. He knew exactly what had happened to Lisa Hartwell because he was responsible for her disappearance. As the initial search efforts stretched into their second week without any significant discoveries, the investigation began to shift focus from rescue to potential criminal activity. The Vermont State Police assigned Detective Captain Linda Rodriguez to lead the criminal investigation, bringing her extensive experience with major crimes to bear on the case. Detective Rodriguez immediately noted several factors that suggested Lisa's disappearance was not voluntary. Lisa had left behind all of her personal belongings, including medications she took daily, her laptop computer containing important academic work, and her bank cards and identification. Most significantly, she had abandoned her car in the college parking lot, making it impossible for her to travel any significant distance on her own. The investigation also revealed that Lisa had been looking forward to several upcoming events, including a visit from her parents the following weekend and a research trip to Boston that she had been planning for months. Friends and family consistently described her as excited about her future and deeply committed to her academic and social responsibilities. Lisa was not someone who would just walk away from her life, Detective Rodriguez explained to the Hartwell family during one of her regular updates. She had too many commitments and too many people who depended on her. Everything we've learned about her suggests that if she's missing, it's because someone prevented her from returning home. The investigation expanded to include everyone who might have had contact with Lisa during her final day. This process revealed the complex social networks that connected the college community with the broader Bennington area, as students, faculty, and local residents interacted in numerous formal and informal settings. Dr. Michael Brennan's name came up frequently during these interviews, but always in positive contexts. Multiple witnesses described him as helpful, knowledgeable, and genuinely concerned about finding Lisa. His active participation in the search effort and his emotional support for Lisa's family and friends created an impression of someone who was deeply affected by the tragedy and committed to helping resolve it. When Detective Rodriguez interviewed Brennan about his knowledge of Lisa and his activities on the day she disappeared, he presented himself as a concerned community member who barely knew the missing student. He claimed to have seen her around town occasionally and to have been aware of her through her reputation as an engaged and academically successful student, but denied any personal relationship with her. Brennan's account of his whereabouts on October 28 seemed straightforward and verifiable. He claimed to have spent the afternoon grading papers in his office, followed by dinner at a local restaurant where he was known as a regular customer. He said he had spent the evening at home reading and had first learned about Lisa's disappearance when Emma Patterson contacted the police on Monday. The alibi seemed solid, supported by receipts from the restaurant and the testimony of staff members who remembered serving him dinner on Friday evening. Brennan's calm demeanor and helpful attitude during the interview created no immediate suspicions, and Detective Rodriguez moved on to other potential leads and suspects. As autumn turned to winter in Vermont, the search for Lisa Hartwell gradually wound down due to weather conditions that made outdoor search efforts dangerous and largely futile. The first major snowfall of the season covered the landscape in a white blanket that would persist until spring, effectively putting any physical search on hold until the following year. The transition from active searching to cold case status was emotionally devastating for Lisa's family and friends. David and Margaret Hartwell remained in Bennington throughout the winter, hoping for some break in the case that would provide answers about their daughter's fate. They rented a small apartment near the college and maintained daily contact with investigators, always hoping that the next phone call would bring news. The college community also struggled to process the loss of one of its most engaged and promising students. Memorial services were held throughout the academic year, and Lisa's professors incorporated discussions of her environmental advocacy work into their classes as a way of honoring her memory and continuing her mission. Dr. Michael Brennan was particularly active in these memorial efforts, organizing fundraising events for environmental causes that Lisa had supported and establishing a scholarship fund in her name. His dedication to preserving Lisa's memory impressed everyone who knew him and reinforced his reputation as a caring and committed community member. The case officially remained active, but with no new leads and no physical evidence to pursue, Detective Rodriguez and her team had little to work with. The investigation had thoroughly examined Lisa's personal relationships, her academic activities, and her involvement in various community organizations without uncovering any obvious motives for someone to harm her. The mysterious phone call that Lisa had received shortly before her disappearance remained a puzzle. Despite extensive efforts to trace the call, investigators were unable to determine its origin or significance. The number had been registered to a prepaid phone that was purchased with cash and never used again after that single call to Lisa. Over the following years, Lisa's case was periodically reviewed by new investigators and re-examined using evolving forensic techniques. Each Halloween, local media would run stories about the ongoing mystery, often connecting Lisa's disappearance to the historical pattern of missing persons in the Bennington Triangle. These stories kept public attention focused on the case but also reinforced the perception that Lisa's disappearance might be connected to supernatural or unexplained forces rather than human criminal activity. Dr. Michael Brennan continued to live and work in the Bennington area, maintaining his reputation as a dedicated educator and community volunteer. He regularly participated in annual memorial events for Lisa and continued to support the scholarship fund that had been established in her name. To outside observers, he appeared to be someone who had been genuinely affected by the tragedy and remained committed to honoring Lisa's memory. What the community didn't know was that Brennan's continued involvement in Lisa's case was motivated not by genuine grief or concern, but by a psychological need to stay close to his crime and to monitor any developments in the investigation. His participation in memorial events and his support for causes Lisa had championed represented a form of psychological trophy-taking that allowed him to relive his crime while maintaining his public facade as a caring community member. For nearly 2 decades, this terrible secret remained hidden beneath Brennan's carefully constructed public persona. He published academic papers, received teaching awards, and was recognized for his community service, all while carrying the knowledge of what he had done to Lisa Hartwell on that October evening in 2005. The breakthrough in Lisa Hartwell's case came in early 2024, nearly 19 years after her disappearance, as part of Vermont's expanded cold case review initiative. The state had committed significant resources to applying advanced forensic techniques to unsolved cases, recognizing that many crimes that had seemed impossible to solve might now be crackable using DNA technology that hadn't existed at the time of the original investigations. Dr. Sarah Kim, a forensic geneticist with the Vermont Forensic Laboratory, was assigned to review the Lisa Hartwell case among dozens of others. The case file contained several pieces of potential evidence that had been preserved but never fully analyzed due to technological limitations in 2005. The most promising evidence came from Lisa's cell phone, which had been found in a storm drain several blocks from her apartment 3 weeks after her disappearance. While the phone had been severely damaged by water, forensic technicians had been able to recover it and preserve it properly for potential future analysis. In 2005, our ability to extract DNA from electronic devices was very limited, Dr. Kim explained to the investigative team. Water damage typically destroyed any biological evidence that might have been present. But advances in extraction techniques and our understanding of how DNA can survive in different environments mean we can now work with evidence that would have been considered hopeless 20 years ago. Using specialized extraction techniques developed for challenging environmental conditions, Dr. Kim's team was able to recover traces of biological material from the phone's surface and internal components. The material was severely degraded, but it contained enough genetic markers for analysis using the most advanced forensic genetic genealogy techniques. The DNA profile that emerged from this analysis was partial and mixed, indicating that multiple people had handled the phone. Lisa's DNA was present, as expected, but there were also traces of foreign DNA that didn't match any profiles in the criminal database. This unknown genetic material became the focus of the genetic genealogy investigation. The partial DNA profile was uploaded to GEDmatch, a public genealogy database that had grown exponentially since Lisa's disappearance. Within hours, the system identified several potential distant relatives of the unknown DNA contributor, providing starting points for building family trees that could eventually lead to a suspect. The genetic genealogy work was painstaking and required several months of careful analysis. Professional genealogists worked with Dr. Kim's team to trace family lines back through multiple generations, using historical records, census data, and other documentation to identify all possible descendants who could be the source of the DNA. The investigation gradually narrowed to a specific family line that had immigrated to Vermont from Ireland in the early 1900s. Further research identified several men from this lineage who would have been the right age and in the right location in 2005, but most were quickly eliminated through conventional investigative methods. One name that remained on the list sent shockwaves through the investigative team: Dr. Michael Brennan. The revelation that Dr. Michael Brennan might be connected to Lisa Hartwell's disappearance through DNA evidence transformed the nearly 20-year-old cold case into an active criminal investigation. Detective Captain Rodriguez, now retired but still living in Vermont, was contacted by current investigators and asked to share her insights about Brennan's role in the original investigation. When I heard that Michael's name had come up through genetic genealogy, I felt sick to my stomach, Rodriguez recalled. Here was someone who had been right in front of us the entire time, helping with the search, comforting the family, organizing memorial events. The idea that he might have been the one responsible for Lisa's disappearance while pretending to help find her was almost too terrible to believe. Current investigators, led by Detective Lieutenant Mark Thompson, began carefully reviewing all of the evidence from the original case with Brennan as a potential suspect. What they discovered was a pattern of behavior that took on sinister new meaning when viewed through the lens of his possible guilt. Brennan had inserted himself into every aspect of the search and investigation, always volunteering to take on key responsibilities and positioning himself to receive the latest information about investigative developments. He had been present at family meetings, search planning sessions, and community events, giving him unprecedented access to information about the case's progress. More troubling was the realization that Brennan's supposed alibi for the evening of Lisa's disappearance had never been thoroughly verified. While restaurant staff remembered serving him dinner, the timing had been established primarily through his own statements and a receipt that could have been obtained at any time during the restaurant's operating hours. The investigative team also discovered that Brennan had a history of concerning behavior toward female students that had been reported to college administrators but never formally investigated. Several women had complained about inappropriate comments, unwelcome attention, and boundary-crossing behavior that had made them uncomfortable but hadn't risen to the level of formal charges. The challenge facing investigators was confirming the genetic genealogy findings with a direct DNA sample from Brennan. They needed to accomplish this without alerting him to the renewed investigation, as he remained in the area and could potentially flee or destroy evidence if he suspected he was under scrutiny. Surveillance operations revealed that Brennan, now in his late 60s, was still teaching at the local college and living in the same house he had occupied in 2005. He had never married and lived alone, maintaining a low profile in the community while continuing to participate in academic and volunteer activities. The opportunity to collect a DNA sample came when Brennan attended a faculty meeting at the college. Surveillance officers observed him drinking from a disposable coffee cup during the meeting, then discarding the cup in a trash container when the meeting ended. The cup was immediately retrieved and transported to the state crime lab for analysis. Within 48 hours, Dr. Kim's team had extracted a complete DNA profile from saliva residue on the cup. The comparison with the genetic material from Lisa's cell phone was definitive. Dr. Michael Brennan was the source of the foreign DNA found on the device. The confirmation of Brennan's DNA match provided investigators with the probable cause they needed to obtain search warrants for his residence and office. The searches revealed a disturbing collection of materials that painted a picture of someone who had been obsessed with Lisa Hartwell's case for nearly 2 decades. Hidden in Brennan's home office, investigators found detailed files about Lisa's disappearance, including newspaper clippings, police reports that should not have been accessible to the public, and photographs from search efforts. Most chilling was a journal that documented Brennan's thoughts and activities related to the case over the years. The journal entries revealed someone who took perverse pleasure in his proximity to the investigation and his ability to deceive everyone around him. He had written extensively about his interactions with Lisa's family, describing their grief in clinical terms and expressing satisfaction at his ability to provide comfort while knowing he was the cause of their suffering. On March 15, 2024, nearly 19 years after Lisa Hartwell's disappearance, Dr. Michael Brennan was arrested at his home by Vermont State Police. The arrest was coordinated to coincide with his morning routine, catching him off guard and preventing any opportunity to destroy evidence or flee. Brennan's reaction to the arrest was notably different from what investigators had expected. Rather than expressing shock or maintaining his innocence, he seemed almost relieved that his secret had finally been discovered. His first words to arresting officers were, "I've been waiting for this day for a long time." The charges against Brennan included first-degree murder, kidnapping, and numerous counts related to tampering with evidence and obstructing justice. Given his age and the seriousness of the charges, he was held without bail pending trial. News of Brennan's arrest sent shockwaves through the Bennington community, where he had been a respected figure for nearly 20 years. Colleagues, students, and community members struggled to reconcile the helpful, caring persona they had known with the horrific crimes he was accused of committing. "It's impossible to describe how betrayed we all feel," said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a colleague who had worked with Brennan for over a decade. "He was someone we trusted with our students, someone we looked up to as a leader in our community. To learn that he may have been responsible for Lisa's death while pretending to help find her, it's beyond our ability to comprehend." For Lisa's family, Brennan's arrest brought a complex mixture of relief, vindication, and renewed anguish. David and Margaret Hartwell, now in their 70s, had never given up hope that their daughter's case would eventually be solved, but the revelation of Brennan's involvement was almost too painful to bear. "We welcomed this man into our lives during the worst time we'd ever experienced," Margaret Hartwell said in a statement released through their attorney. "He sat in our living room, held my hand when I cried, and promised us that he would do everything in his power to help find Lisa. To learn that he was the one who took her from us is a betrayal beyond words." 2 weeks after his arrest, Dr. Michael Brennan agreed to speak with investigators. In a small interview room at the Vermont State Police headquarters, he faced Detective Lieutenant Thompson and other members of the investigative team for what would prove to be a confession that finally revealed the truth about Lisa Hartwell's fate. Brennan's confession was delivered with the same calm, analytical tone that had characterized his academic lectures and community presentations. He showed no emotion as he described the events of October 28, 2005, treating his revelation of Lisa's murder as if he were presenting research findings to a scholarly audience. "I had been watching Lisa for several months before that Friday," Brennan began, his voice steady and clinical. "She represented everything I found attractive: intelligence, commitment to causes I cared about, a kind of purity that I wanted to possess. I convinced myself that we had a connection, that she would understand my feelings if I could just find the right way to approach her." Brennan described how he had used his knowledge of Lisa's routines and habits to position himself along her walking route from campus to her apartment. The phone call that had puzzled investigators for years had been placed by Brennan using a prepaid phone he had purchased specifically for that purpose. "I called her and claimed to be conducting a survey about student attitudes toward environmental policy," he continued. "I told her it would only take a few minutes and asked if she could meet me at a location that was slightly off her normal route. She was always willing to help with academic research, so she agreed." The location Brennan had chosen was a small park area behind a row of historic houses, a spot that was isolated enough for privacy but still within the general area where Lisa would normally be walking. When she arrived, Brennan attempted to engage her in what he believed would be a romantic conversation about their shared environmental interests. "I thought she would be impressed by my knowledge and passion," he said, showing the first signs of emotion during the confession. "But she became uncomfortable very quickly. She realized that this wasn't really about a survey, and she tried to leave. That's when everything went wrong." According to Brennan's confession, Lisa's attempt to leave triggered a violent response that he claimed he hadn't planned but couldn't control. He grabbed her to prevent her from walking away, and when she began to call for help, he placed his hands over her mouth to silence her. "I never intended to hurt her," Brennan said, though his clinical tone suggested otherwise. "But once I had started, I couldn't stop. She was struggling, and I was afraid someone would hear her, so I had to make sure she stayed quiet." Brennan described strangling Lisa until she lost consciousness, then realizing that he had killed her. Panicked by what he had done but determined to avoid discovery, he moved her body to his car and drove to a remote location in the Green Mountain National Forest where he buried her in a carefully chosen spot. The location Brennan described was in a section of forest that had been extensively searched during the original investigation, but his burial site was in a depression that wasn't visible from any of the trails or routes that search teams had followed. He had covered the grave with fallen logs and natural debris, making it virtually impossible to detect even for experienced searchers. After disposing of Lisa's body, Brennan had returned to the area where he had confronted her and carefully removed any evidence of their encounter. He then drove to the restaurant where he established his alibi, making sure to interact with staff members who would remember seeing him there. The hardest part was acting surprised when I learned she was missing, Brennan admitted. I had to pretend to be concerned and helpful while knowing exactly what had happened to her. But I discovered that I was quite good at maintaining that deception. The most disturbing aspect of Brennan's confession was his description of the years that followed Lisa's murder. Rather than expressing remorse or guilt, he described how he had taken satisfaction in his ability to deceive everyone around him while staying close to the investigation and the grieving family. I found it intellectually stimulating to be so intimately involved in the search for someone when I knew they would never be found, he said with chilling detachment. There was something almost artistic about maintaining such a complete deception for so many years. Armed with Brennan's detailed confession, law enforcement teams organized an expedition to recover Lisa Hartwell's remains from the remote forest location he had described. The site was in the Green Mountain National Forest, several miles from any marked trail and accessible only by hiking through difficult terrain. The recovery team included forensic anthropologists from the University of Vermont, FBI evidence specialists, and investigators from multiple agencies. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the forensic anthropologist leading the recovery, understood that after nearly 20 years in the Vermont forest environment, they might find very little physical evidence. Nearly 2 decades in this climate, with freeze-thaw cycles, root growth, and animal activity, can completely disperse remains, Dr. Martinez explained to the team before beginning the search. We need to be prepared to search a much wider area than the original burial site and to work with whatever evidence we can find. On April 10, 2024, the recovery team located the area that Brennan had described in his confession. The site was exactly as remote and hidden as he had claimed, a natural depression in the forest floor that was invisible from any nearby trails and surrounded by dense undergrowth that would have deterred casual hikers. Using ground-penetrating radar and careful excavation techniques, the team located human remains buried approximately 4 feet below the surface. The burial showed evidence of careful planning. The body had been wrapped in plastic and placed in a depression that had been dug specifically for that purpose. Along with Lisa's skeletal remains, investigators found personal items that confirmed her identity and corroborated Brennan's confession. These included jewelry that her family recognized, fragments of the clothing she had been wearing on the day she disappeared, and her college identification card. The recovery process took 2 days of meticulous work to ensure that all evidence was properly documented and preserved. While the passage of time had degraded much of the physical evidence, the location and circumstances of the burial clearly supported Brennan's account of the crime. On May 1, 2024, nearly 19 years after her disappearance, Lisa Hartwell was finally laid to rest in a ceremony that brought together hundreds of people whose lives she had touched during her brief time in Vermont. The service was held at the Bennington College chapel, where Lisa had attended weekly gatherings and participated in discussions about social justice and environmental responsibility. The eulogy was delivered by Dr. Patricia Williams, Lisa's former environmental science professor, who spoke about the lasting impact of Lisa's commitment to making the world a better place. Lisa Hartwell believed that each of us has a responsibility to protect the natural world and to fight for justice for all people, Dr. Williams said. Her life was cut tragically short, but her ideals live on in the students she inspired and the causes she championed. The Hartwell family used the occasion to announce the expansion of the Lisa Hartwell Memorial Scholarship into a full endowment that would support environmental science students at Bennington College in perpetuity. The scholarship had been funded over the years by donations from community members who had never forgotten Lisa's disappearance and wanted to honor her memory. Dr. Michael Brennan's trial began in September 2024, drawing national attention as a landmark case demonstrating the power of genetic genealogy to solve decades-old crimes. The case was prosecuted by Vermont Attorney General Sarah Mitchell, who specialized in major crimes and had extensive experience with complex forensic evidence. The evidence against Brennan was comprehensive and overwhelming. In addition to his detailed confession and the DNA evidence that had led to his identification, prosecutors presented evidence of his deceptive behavior over the nearly 20 years since Lisa's murder. The journal entries he had kept about the case provided particularly damning evidence of his psychological state and his enjoyment of the deception he had maintained. Brennan's defense attorney, court-appointed public defender James Morrison, faced a nearly impossible task given his client's confession and the physical evidence supporting the prosecution's case. Morrison attempted to argue for a reduced sentence based on Brennan's age, his lack of prior criminal convictions, and his cooperation with the investigation once he was confronted with the evidence. However, the calculated nature of the crime and Brennan's behavior during the years that followed made it difficult to generate sympathy for the defendant. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological impact of his deception on Lisa's family and the broader community, describing it as a form of prolonged psychological torture. The most powerful testimony came from Lisa's family and friends, who described the impact of her disappearance and the additional trauma of learning that someone they had trusted had been responsible for her death. Margaret Hartwell's victim impact statement was particularly moving as she described 19 years of grief compounded by betrayal. Dr. Brennan didn't just kill our daughter, she testified. He tortured our family for 19 years by pretending to help us while knowing exactly what he had done. He attended memorial services, contributed to scholarship funds, and presented himself as someone who cared about Lisa's memory. That level of cruelty goes beyond the original crime. On November 15, 2024, after a 6-week trial, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all charges. The deliberation had taken less than 4 hours, reflecting the overwhelming nature of the evidence and the clear premeditation that had characterized Brennan's crimes. Judge Elizabeth Carter sentenced Brennan to life in prison without the possibility of parole, noting that Vermont's progressive approach to criminal justice emphasized rehabilitation and restoration, but that some crimes were so heinous that the only appropriate response was permanent incarceration.